Today's discussion is about pollution, and pollution is man's placing into the environment substances that, because of either their nature of or their abundance, make a significant negative change in the environment. So it's anything that we put in there that either because of what it is or how much we're putting in there uh, has a negative effect on our environment. So let's look at different types of pollutants that the first one is going to be pollutants that we consider are biodegradable. These are the ones that break down and return to normal cycling of substances. Uh, for instance, these packing peanuts in this box are made of cellulose, and cellulose is plant material and it will break down. In fact, it'll even, I think, dissolve in water. Uh, then we have what the other kind of pollutants that we call non-biodegradable pollutants. They stay in their original form. They don't decompose in their environment. And like if we put plastics in landfills, the plastics will last for many years without breaking down. Uh, and plastics is also a major uh, pollutant in our oceans. So pollution can have an impact on water and on the air and on soil. So we're going to look at each of these in a little more detail. So let's begin with water pollution. Well, water pollution begins with a contamination of water, obviously. Like if wastes from the sewer of a city are released into a stream, it's only a matter of time and distance before the natural decomposer organisms that are in the stream or in the river will convert that sewage back into usable materials. So it's pollution, but God's created our water system, waterways, streams and rivers, to be able to decompose this. But if we put it in too large amounts, that's a problem. So we have point source types of pollution, where here you can clearly see where the source of the pollution is, as this sewage is being dumped into a river or a stream. Then we also have non-point sources of pollution, where as in the example of this shown over right, is we have power plants that burn coal, and part of coal has sulfur in it, and when it also burns when the coal burns, and some of the nitrogen in the air also forms some nitrous compounds and as they come out of the smokestack, they enter the atmosphere. The sulfur dioxide will eventually be converted into sulfuric acid, and that will come down as rain, and that rain is we call acid rain, and then that will run into the rivers, which will turn the lakes acidic, and at a point where the river or the lake is too acidic, then all life will cease out of that. And it also can affect the soil as well. Phosphates that can also be in sewage is when it's released into a stream, contains, well, first of all, phosphates are very effective cleaning agents, but the problem is that they're like fertilizer to the algae that grows in streams, and eventually the streams can be just practically clogged with algae, that it makes it difficult for other living things to survive. Air pollution can be of one of two kinds. It's either particulate matter or it could be noxious gases. The particles could be like soot, other uh, or dust. When I lived in Phoenix, that was primarily the problem there was dust and not as much smoke. But in some places they have a lot of uh, manufacturing things like that that can produce particulate matter. And noxious gases are produced by automobiles and things like that that produce gases. Soil pollution. Uh, Here's a picture that looks pretty gross. Most soil pollution issues are related to man-made chemicals that are deliberately, as in this case, uh, spilled on the ground. They constantly have been coming here to dump motor oil, and as you can see, it's accumulating and moving down the hill, and consequently, there's nothing growing there where the oil is. And chemicals within the used oil can dissolve in the rainwater and seep down into the soil and make it harmful as well. Another type of pollution is hazardous waste, and this is a challenge is not as significant as what the pollutants are chemically when the pollutants are chemically active. Uh, so these examples here, like the lead inside of batteries, chemicals that we use for cleaning and paint products and things like that, by themselves are only a problem if they're not um, disposed of properly. And if they're not, those can be harmful to other living things. So when we have soil pollution, uh, these are some of the things that can happen because of soil pollution. Let's just kind of look at the diagram a bit. Over on the right, towards the top, we have a chemical waste pit where uh, chemicals have been dumped or buried even. Here in the Omaha area, they used to have a lead plant down closer to the river. It's kind of like an old downtown part would be, and there's an area there that is contaminated with lead that the EPA has worked and still is working to take care of the problem. It's in the soil. And then we have trash dumps. If trash is not properly handled, rainwater and uh, surface water will run off, soak through the stuff that we put in the dump, and it can seep down into the groundwater, which ultimately somebody's going to draw that water out and drink it. So that could be a problem. Over on the left, we see a surface station tank. Um, Modern laws have made this less of a problem, but older surface stations, um, maybe more in rural areas and things like that, that have been around a very long time, their tanks will rust and eventually start leaking uh, gasoline and things like that down into the soil. So all of these are ways that the soil can be contaminated or polluted. And then another kind of pollution that a lot of people don't really think about is called energy pollution, sometimes referred to as the urban heat island effect. Yeah, even Omaha, we have that, where you've probably noticed that in the cities is actually much warmer, like in downtown, than it is out in the urban areas. And the reason for that is in downtown we have a lot more paved streets, a lot less vegetation. Um, the pavement, the concrete, the black roofs all absorb heat, and that heat then heats up the air that's over it and makes it much warmer in the cities than it is out on the edges of town. And there's also a lot less vegetation. So uh, many cities have, in their planning, have required new construction to include more vegetation that will cover uh, like some of the parking lot surfaces and make it uh, not the heat island effect not quite so pronounced. Now, another idea that needs to be talked about right now is something called biological magnification. And what this is it's the concentration of small quantities of a substance into larger quantities as it's passing through the food chain. And one example would be is in the past we used DDT as a pesticide to kill uh, pests, obviously, mosquitoes and different things like that. Uh, and the DDT doesn't kill all the insects. Some of the insects uh, got that DDT on them, and then if predatory birds would eat these insects, they would get the DDT in them, as they kept eating more of these insects, the DDT would accumulate in their body. So that's what we call biological magnification. It's becoming more magnified in that bird's body. And one of the results of this we discovered was that when the birds would lay an egg, the shell of the egg was very fragile, and as you can see in the right in the picture, it's broken and flat, and so even though the bird would lay an egg, it wouldn't produce any young because their chance of even being hatched was remote. Another problem that can happen um, is mercury in fishing. Uh, One of the lakes that we like to fish up in Canada was closed to fishing for a number of years because I think it was a paper or a sawmill in there, in their processing of the wood pulp, uh, would uh, would release a mercury compound into the water. And this diagram that I have here is actually from Minnesota, but the same idea. And the mercury compounds would be on the bottom, and the smaller uh, fish would eat that, which in turn would be eaten by bigger fish, and the and those in turn by bigger fish. Well, every time a fish is getting these mercury compounds inside their body, and their body has a hard time metabolizing and getting rid of it, so it just stays in the body, so that when you would catch these fish and eat them, you would be you'd have mercury poisoning because of that. So um, it takes a while for that to get out of the system, and those lakes are, okay to fish in right now. Now, recycling is going to be one of our answers to certain kinds of pollutants. The benefits, it helps to reduce the demands on our natural resources, so we don't have to keep uh, manufacturing new materials. We can use the materials that again and again and again, and this keeps materials out of the landfills. And that's um, I don't know if you've ever thought about how much stuff you throw away, and then how many millions of people in the US are doing the same thing, that there is a lot of trash that is going into landfills. And some of those substances like paper and glass and plastic uh, and cloth fibers can actually be recycled. If you've ever been to Walmart, you notice that the people that work there often wear vests, and on the back of the vest it'll say how many plastic bottles were used to manufacture that vest. In other words, the plastic is being recycled. And if you look on plastic materials, they often have a number on it, and the number indicates what kind of a plastic it is. And some plastics are very difficult to recycle, but others are easily recycled. But what's the difficulty with recycling? You maybe can look at your own family. How well do you do at recycling? And its problem is just getting people to do it. So cities have set up recycling programs to make it easier for people to want to do that. And so they say a successful recycling program is closing the loop. In other words, just bringing uh, the materials that someone disposes of, recycling it, and then making it into new products that they want to purchase. So here's, for example, would be a consumer purchasing the packaging uh, that something they purchased is wrapped in, and it's made out of materials that have been recycled. And so some of these things can be recycled multiple times, but recycling is not free. You'd think it would be, but it's not. There's a cost involved in recycling, but the goal is to make it uh, small enough that people will be willing to pay for it. So what's man's ecological future? Well, Christians should not ignore genuine environmental issues. So we need to look at it from a biblical perspective and um, choose those issues that we can deal with. Recycling is clearly one of those that, as believers, I think we can easily do that. Uh, if it can be recycled, we should. And you have to remember that the Lord has left believers